All right, everybody. I am thoroughly excited today with my guest. So I want to introduce Jim Starr LASER Kalafat. Now, so most of you know, this is Laser from the original American Gladiators.
The original. Don't forget. No.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And this is I want to start off by saying I am like the last guy to mark out or tell somebody, oh my gosh, a big fan. I just don't do that. But I am going to tell you right now, when I met Jim, I reached out to Jim to try to get him to do a podcast with me. And luckily got him. We talked and just immediately I was like, oh man, this is awesome. We had so many things to talk about. But I watched Jim with my dad religiously every Saturday. We had to get cable first. And once we got cable, I swear to you, man, watched every Saturday till you weren't doing it anymore. And oh man, one of my favorite all-time gladiators. So guys, this is Laser from American Gladiators.
Appreciate it, Dylan. I really do. The first time we spoke, man, we just, not knowing each other, I didn't know your background, and man, we hit it off, and there was just so many parallels in our life together that we've done, we're interested in, such as peptides that, it came out of nowhere. And we just have been getting along for the last, I think it's been a month or so, and been talking all the time. And you're sharing pictures with your daughter that you just had out. And it's really cool. And very few times in life do you meet someone where that immediate connection's there. So I think kudos to both of us for that. Yeah. So pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very, very exciting for me to have you. And I want to thank you for taking the time because I know you're busy and I know you got a lot of stuff going on. So anytime I can have that time, it means a lot. It's appreciated.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I want to kind of start off. I think it'd be cool if people could just kind of hear some more about you. Obviously I want to hear about your experience on Gladiators and stuff first would be pretty cool to get into. But then I just kind of want to talk to you about not only your experiences on there, but other things like perhaps that propelled you into doing later, or maybe it didn't, just some interests or things that you're working on now, and kind of talk about the Netflix series. And I know we could talk for years on end, really, probably, but let's get into some cool things about you. I'm very curious, and I'm sure everybody else is
for sure. Too. Well, I'm actually in Great Falls, Montana, born and raised here, at my mom's. If everyone could give a big shout out and a big prayer to my mom. She's going through chemo. Wow. She's a warrior, boy. She's 89 years old, and she's just she's a magnificent human being. If more people were like my mom, we'd have a better world. She's just happy, energetic. She still goes to the gym, kicks ass three times a week. So yeah, I've been in Montana for the last 2 months. Unfortunately, I'm in a position that I'm able to be here with her and just help her out. And so unfortunately, my wife is back in Denver. Haven't seen my wife in a while, but we're good. So anyhow, grew up in Montana. And, if you've been watching Yellowstone, it's a little bit like that. Not too much, but people do end up doing a lot of fighting here in the bars and stuff. But it was just a great place to grow up. My family, my dad and grandpa were great athletes. My dad was a national handball champion. My dad was a boxer and was a football standout here in Montana, and he ended up going to Washington State. So the pedigree of being an athlete, my brother was an awesome athlete. He's 6 years younger than I am. But I had, growing up, I did every sport you could imagine, right? So, which most kids did, but I had this vision, even when I was young, we would go to the park and play tackle football in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and we'd all emulate some professional football player. I was always Walter Payton. It's a good choice, or Larry Zonka, and I just wanted to be a professional football player, period. I didn't know how I was going to get there. And you have to remember, Dylan, this is before the internet, before cell phones.
Right.
You couldn't look people up, and you couldn't find out really what to do as an individual to to go to great heights and to get to that next level, right? Except for what you're involved in with your parents or your school. So, but I knew I wanted to play professional football. I didn't know how I was going to get there. So I ended up being a pretty dang good athlete in high school, and I really focused on football. And my senior year, I was a running back. I was a tailback. I led the entire state of Montana with the most yards in one season. I think I had 1,200 yards, something like that. And I had quite a few football scholarships to go outside of Montana. But I went on a recruiting trip to Montana State University, the Bobcats. Had just one hell of a recruiting weekend, and they showed me everything. And I just fell in love with Montana State and ended up being a Bobcat. Well, the first year, I graduated at 200 pounds, and I still have the bench press record at my high school over here at CMR. I benched 400 pounds when I was a senior in high school. And I graduated 200 pounds, and they recruited me as a fullback. So I went from tailback to fullback. I shared my time as a true freshman with a senior. And then finally, my sophomore year, I was a starting fullback. And, I didn't have the wheels. I wasn't running a 4.5 as a running back. I was about a 4.65. And we had a new coach by the name of Doug Graber that came in at Montana State going into my junior year. And he put a winter conditioning program on that kicked our asses. And I'm telling you that this guy was tough as nails and no holds barred. And I got to tell you, just a mean SOB, but he's a great guy at the same time. You respected him, right? We did this winter conditioning program in the morning before school started for 2 hours, toughest thing I've ever did. And he pulled me aside entering into my spring season of my junior year. And he said, Jim, I know you want to play professional football. I'm looking at your mentality during winter conditioning. You're a great leader. You got that defensive mentality where you just want to kick ass and take names and crush people. He said, why don't we try you at inside linebacker, during the spring ball? What do you think? I said, yeah, let's give it a try. Holy hell, did I excel. It's like the beast was unleashed. And I was kicking ass, man. And then I get into my, the full season, my junior year, and I broke all kinds of records. I had most tackles in a season in the Big Sky, and it's still a record today. It's 202. I had 202 tackles in one season, 32 tackles in one game, which is still a record. And then going in my senior year, I was voted to be an All-American and all of this. And unfortunately, our senior year, we went 1-10, and I missed almost 4 games I really hurt my ankle. But what happened, I could have gray shirted, but I went in on the 4th. So if you miss 4 games, you automatically gray shirt. Well, I went in on the 4th quarter of that 4th game. So if I would have missed the 4th quarter and not gone in, I would have automatically been eligible to gray shirt. But, as an athlete, you're not thinking of next year. I just wanted to play.
Right.
Well, and this is the reason I bring this up is, so we go 1-10, terrible senior year. I was expected to get drafted. Obviously, coming from a smaller school, you don't get the notoriety. You don't get the college or the scouts coming out to look at you. My agent thought I was going to get drafted. Well, lo and behold, and I'm going to fast forward 1 year. All my roommates in college were all juniors. We lost myself and maybe 2 other guys on the team that were fairly good athletes that went on to the NFL. But those guys the next year won the national championship, and they had the same coaches, same team. And I could have been on that national championship team, and they were all inducted to the Hall of Fame. And you can kind of tell I'm a little jealous because I actually am. But hindsight, and we've talked about this before, hindsight's 20/20, right? Who knows what would have happened if I would have missed that 4th quarter gone on to the national championship team. I definitely probably would have been drafted. That's for certain. But I may not have landed the Gladiators, right? Because that changed my trajectory in life. So anyhow, long story short, I didn't get drafted, but that year is when the United States Football League came about. And I was drafted by the San Antonio Gunslingers. They drafted 2 linebackers, and I was one of them. Unfortunately, they did not call me for 2 weeks after I was drafted. So my agent, Ken Stanager from Montana, said, hey, I don't know about this new league. Maybe we should just pass on it. I mean, they haven't called you. Maybe that's a sign. And I passed. I didn't want to go. Hindsight's 20/20 again. I probably should have went and got some playing time and under my belt at that level. Anyhow, so Doug Graber, who came in my junior year, actually ended up leaving a year later and went to the Kansas City Chiefs and was the defensive back coach. And he had called my agent and said, we're pretty sure we're going to draft Jim in the late rounds, and it didn't happen. So I ended up going on as a free agent to Kansas City, got to the 4th preseason game, hurt that same ankle again. Unfortunately, they sent me home, and that was the end of my career right there, right? So I get back to Montana thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And I went back to school because I had another 2 quarters before I could graduate. And so I went back 1 quarter. Then I went up to Canada. So I went up to Toronto Argonauts and played up there for about a year and a half. Okay. And unfortunately, that league just wasn't for me. It's just different. It wasn't for me. They had me at outside linebacker. They had me going from 230 pounds down to 218 because it's more of a pass game. And
yeah, I was just going to say pass. That's where Rocket Ishmael went, remember, and played it for the Toronto Argonauts.
Yeah.
I remember.
And so I went back home, and then I went back to school, thank gosh, and got my degree in 86. And then I got into bodybuilding, right? So I was like, what am I going to do with my time? So, going from 230 pounds to 260, and 21-inch arms and 31-inch thighs. And, I competed in the rest of Montana. I did well. But it just wasn't filling that void of playing football, right? It gave me a goal. It gave me something to do, but it just wasn't for me. And long story short, I ended up applying for a job. My granddad was from California, and he worked at the Park and Rec department, and he knew a gentleman by the name of Duke Llewellyn who owned the downtown LA Athletic Club. So I called him. Yeah. They interviewed me. They flew me out, and I got my first corporate job running a health club. And I moved all the way to California by myself in my little Mazda B2000 pickup truck. And I was lonely, man. I didn't know one person. I was by myself, rented a little apartment.
Well, you're coming from Montana, dude. I mean, that's like a life change.
Life and the traffic, and it's all new to me, right? I never left the state of Montana. I was in Kansas City for 6 weeks, and went up to Toronto, but it was a culture shock, and I was lonely as F, man. I got to tell you, it was.
I believe it.
Probably I was with that company for 7 months, and then the strike season happened with the NFL, and my agent called and said, "Hey, the Rams want to sign you." I'm like, "Hell yeah!" It took me 2 hours to make a decision. Do I want to do the corporate, or do I just want to play a little football? I ended up quitting.
Yeah, corporate, dude.
I quit, and I went down to Anaheim, and lo and behold, I made the team, and that's when I met Dan Clark Nitro from the Gladiators, because he played. He played at Fresno, or San Jose, and so he played outside linebacker, and we were in the locker room, and we just hit it off and became best friends, and kind of the rest is history from there. So
I was going to ask you, because I just had a feeling, because a lot of times, like, WWF wrestlers and like I figured gladiators, they all have like a football background.
Yep.
You know, and something happened where they were going to make it and something didn't work out and they were tremendous.
Right.
It seems like a lot. So I had a feeling that there was other gladiators too that probably had some football
background. They did,
background.
Dylan. There was, Dan Clark was one hell of an athlete. He played over in Europe.
Yeah.
And, played in the NFL. And then Gemini, who was Michael Horton, he played, I think, on and off for 11 years. Lee Rariman, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. Hawk, he played. At least he had a tryout, and there was a couple other guys that also had a football background. So yeah, they're studs, man. I mean, yeah, you were spot on with that analogy.
I'm laughing here too because, and we'll get into this in a minute, but when we had the conversation about the different gladiator games, and you said Powerball was your favorite, now I know why you fuckers like Powerball so much. You your football licks on the helpless out there.
And that was loving it, man. Think about it. There's guys that have played professional football, and we're in Powerball tackling contenders that are 160 to 210. If you think about it, it's like you got professional athletes going against just rookies, right? I mean, amateurs, and it's I never thought of it until just right now. It's like, yeah, that's it's kind of skewed a little bit there, right? Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because I remember this because like if a gladiator would get knocked off the joust or something, or like somebody kind of hit you or something on the Powerball, I noticed that sometimes you guys look fucking irate. And that was probably real. Like that's real life. I'm pissed,
all
right?
Of it was real. And I'll give you a short story here. So I was approached along with Steve Hennerberry, who was Tower. We were approached by the agent of Jim, who's the guy that ran WWF back in the day? McMahon.
Vince McMahon. Yes.
So they wanted Tower and I to be the next tag team champions, like the tag team. And I turned it down. I just, because these guys take a beating, great athletes, nothing against them, but it's staged. They know who's going to win or lose, right? That's just not me, man.
But too, back then, it's different now. They're still on the road a lot, but back then it was 300 and some days a year. They've cut it down a little bit, but those guys had drinking problems, painkiller problems. They got the shit beat out of them every day. So it's probably good you didn't.
I think so too. And that was, I never thought of what you just mentioned, because you talk about a grind. Those guys, man, they used and abused those guys. And I never thought of it in those terms. All I cared about is, is it real or is it fake? Because when I go out there, I'm going to give 110%. I'm not going to give up my win to say it's a loss because they want ratings, right? That's just not me. So I turned it down. Yeah. So Steve was a little upset because he wanted to do it. And I just said, nah, not for me, buddy. Not for me. No. Yeah. So.
Probably long term, because a lot when you're on the road like that, you only have so much you can do, and a lot of these guys, they die young, and people say, oh, it's steroids. Well, it's not just steroids. In fact, it's a combination of steroids with painkillers and all the cocaine and all of the drinking. It wasn't just steroids. That is so far, it didn't help.
No, it doesn't
certainly
help.
Didn't help.
And hey, Dylan, as well as I do, and I'll get on a tangent here. There hasn't been a medical evaluation for someone that has died. Let's say someone has a heart attack that has used anabolic steroids. I don't know how we're getting on this subject, but they've never come out specifically and said that individual died specifically of PEDs. Never.
Right.
Did it contribute?
No.
Did they have heart disease prior? Did something went wrong? Right. We do know that it probably contributed to the death, but
Absolutely.
It's not the sole reason why someone has died. And it kind of upsets me that, the media and people portray users of PEDs as though they're this, terrible omen of a human being. I don't know. It just kind of gets under my skin because it's just, that's.
It's this whole they call it the dark side, and they come out with all of this shit, and it's media, propaganda. It's everything in life now. It's not just, I mean, it's everything. You can't, it's literally everything we do. And that's why I don't pay attention to it, because it's just going to cloud your,
I think we can both be honest with us and the audience here is, hey, there's some guys that are taking a crap load of stuff that, I mean, so much stuff that hey, come on. Scary. What do you think's going to happen? I mean, but these guys get addicted just like anything else with cocaine or anything else, and same with anabolic steroids. I had a buddy in college, and I'm not going to say his name, but I got to tell you, he was addicted to anabolic steroids. He could not get off them, and he had to go through some long treatments to finally get that mindset that just because he went off doesn't mean in his mind, it was almost like the anorexic type syndrome where you think you're fat and you're not. Same thing happened to him. And so it really screws with your mind. But I mean, some of these guys are using so much stuff nowadays. It's like, come on, bro. Really? I mean, you're not even competing at the professional level, and you just want to bring home a trophy and look good. But in this same time, you're going to accumulate different possible side effects that would lead to an early death. Really? Like, come on, guys.
I know. And we're going to get on to that here shortly. Want to finish talking about kind of with the Gladiators. So you talked about how you got found on it, but then tell me, like, because I'm curious, I know a lot of people are, what was it like backstage, on stage, like the whole mentality, but amongst you guys? Like, I'm sure some people think it's staged like WWF, but more people realize it's not. And so I'm wondering, like, are you guys back there getting fucking pumped up and pumping each other up, or like, what's the pep talks like, and what's it like back there in general? And then what's it like when you're actually doing it? Like, are you getting a big adrenaline rush? Are you really setting out to just like, I'm going to win and I'm going to beat the shit out of these guys? Like, I'm curious.
I love it. I'll kind of go to your last statement. Like, it is all I can say. And I can't say, well, I can probably say it for all the guys. Well, even the women, all the gladiators, males and females. We took that show as serious could be. And we would get so pumped back in the locker room or back in the training room, because we were segmented. We had all the contenders on one side of the building, all the gladiators. They didn't want us fraternizing with each other, right? Because, hey, if I become your buddy, there's a mentality set that, hey, you're my friend, I probably won't go as hard against you. So they separated us all together all the time. But it was, man, I pumped myself up. I mean, I just remember I'm not a rah guy. I'm more intense and thinking of just how to kick ass and take names. And we were all like that, and when they would tell us, especially Powerball, or the gauntlet. Remember the gauntlet? We'd have the different apparatuses and the guy would run down the gauntlet. That was,
I wanted to do the gauntlet so bad my whole life, dude.
It was just, what a rush when you have, because I was on teams my whole life. So when you have a team of other team members that you can just, get nasty with, it was just, we'd all get together and just, we would want to kick ass. And the feeling, we'd have a live audience. Something happens in my mind, which is a little odd. And I've been that way since I was in junior high. I don't hear the crowd. I don't hear anyone yelling.
Yeah.
I can tune everything out. And it's almost silence in my mind, in my head, that it's just about the competition. And when it's over and you hear the bell or the buzzer or the whistle, I all of a sudden come out of it like, what the hell? Like, like a drug or something. It is the weirdest. It is weird. That's all I can tell you. It's just weird that my mind goes to a different place. I used to box when I was in college too, and did these smokers, and I couldn't hear the crowd. Like it was just silence.
It's crazy.
Weirdest thing. Even football games, I couldn't hear the crowd, and it was just a silent, like a cover of, like I'm in a room by myself. Really, really odd.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you about some of the different events there, because when we were talking and I told you what I liked, you're like, that's the most boring one. But I'm going to tell you, like, from my observation, what I like to watch. And then I want to know what was the most fun for you to do, and then the ones you guys liked and didn't like. So my favorite was, I think it's called rocket launcher, right?
Assault.
So
with the tennis balls.
Assault. So if anybody that remembers, it's the one where like the gladiators up there shooting the rockets down at people trying to hit them, and they're going from place to place, like diving on the ground, shooting bow and arrow, throwing things, like trying to hit that target. But I can see how that'd be boring to you because you're not doing anything.
Just shooting the balls. That was boring. Yeah. I mean, it was boring for me. It was fun.
Brother, watching that though, oh my gosh, when you're watching that at home, it is so exciting. Like it really was.
Let me tell you, those tennis balls are coming about 120 miles an hour out of that gun. I mean, every year the gun got more, they realized how to get the gun more powerful, with CO2 or whatever they used. And man, I got to tell you, the tennis balls were flying, man.
You can tell. And, rarely, it wasn't too often that people hit the target, but I liked it as a kid because then it'd go off and the smoke would come out and everything. It was awesome.
That is true.
But I found myself on that cheering for the competitors, but I always like to see you guys beat the shit out of people on the joust and the Powerball. Those were so fun to watch. A lot of fun,
and then, those two, I would have to say of all the events, the joust was my absolute favorite. I loved the rings. I loved, if you remember the pyramid, with all the stacked cushions or whatever, or I don't know what you call those, the mats. Yeah. I mean, it was about like that. That's how steep it was. I'm telling you, when you're at the top looking down, you're like, holy shit. And you take a contender and you wrapped your arms around him and you come flying down and let me tell you, what a rush that was. But
I believe it.
Big time, man.
What was the one when you guys actually physically got into those balls and had to roll them and get over the to the targets, land on them?
Atmosphere. That was it was fun. I mean, it was different. It was fun. Yeah, you didn't get hurt or anything in them, but that was fun. But yeah, let's see if there's some.
The one that everybody struggled with was on that gauntlet when they had to go like this and go across the thing. You could really see who was not very strong and who wasn't. The competitors, like some of them just couldn't go.
That was the eliminator, and fortunately none of us had to do it. Yeah, I got to tell you, there was some stud athletes in the 7 years I was on that show. I mean, every year we had tryouts in New York, Chicago, and LA. There was one year, it was probably the second to last year before we ended. We had over 25,000 people in line in New York to do the tryouts. I mean, that's some crazy stuff. And that was before social media. They didn't advertise our show. It was all organic marketing, word of mouth. They did not put us in magazines or newspapers. It was hush hush. And it just grew organically. I mean, that is crazy when you think about it.
And I'm not going to say this just because we're talking. This is an absolute fact, and I would bet $1 million on this. I know that they came out with it in like 2008 or whatever. But anybody out there, if you haven't seen the original and you want to compare, I know you can buy DVD sets on like Amazon of the original. It's like a must-have. Seriously, there's nothing that comes close to the original one that Jim was on. You will not beat that. And you could sit there and binge watch that and be so addicted to it and watch it over and over and over. I mean, it is that fucking awesome.
Well, obviously, it's pretty awesome because Netflix decided to do a 5-part documentary on us. So,
yes, talk about that, please. I was going to ask you about that next.
Netflix. Well, let me back up. So, there's 2 documentaries that came out almost simultaneously. The one was the ESPN 30 for 30. I did not do that one, nor did many of the other gladiators that you saw in the Netflix documentary. They did not do the ESPN 30 for 30. And I'll tell you why. is Johnny Ferraro, the creator of co-creator, because Dan Carr was the other creator. Johnny had called us all individually and said, listen, the ESPN is interested in doing a documentary, but I want this documentary to be about myself, Johnny Ferraro. And if you want to be involved, great. And if you don't, great. And all of us we called Johnny back and said, Johnny, the show is not about you. You are a very integral part of the show because you created it. People do want to know how you came up with the idea, how you sold it to Samuel Goldwyn into Hollywood. But having 2 to 3 episodes entirely about you, we're not into that. And nor did he want to pay us for our time. So myself and Nitro and Ice and Zap and Tower, most of the A-listed gladiators got together and we just said, hey, we never got hardly paid back in the day. They took advantage of us. We need to stand our ground and say no. And we did. We said, we're not doing it.
Good for you.
And we did. And they had to scramble and find gladiators. And if you watch that ESPN, there isn't really any A-listed gladiators except for maybe Gemini, right? He was on 2 seasons out of the 7, I think, something like that. But, so they had to scramble and find whomever. And they got a lot of B gladiators, backup gladiators that were on the show for maybe a year. Anyhow, we didn't do that. And fortunately, Dan Clark Nitro, who's still in kind of the Hollywood scene, really got the Netflix documentary sealed and delivered via Netflix. He worked with them, worked with a production company, and so they launched the Netflix documentary. And the ESPN one came out a month before ours. It wasn't planned like that. It just and I think what happened is springboarded ours because they did all the advertising of the Gladiator documentary. And unless you watch ESPN, you probably wouldn't see it anyhow, but it launched ours.
Sure.
I think it helped ours in terms of ratings because they did a lot of the press about ESPN, and then ours came around, and ours was the number 1 rated show on Netflix for 3 weeks running as a documentary. And I guess Netflix told our production company that that's never happened ever. And that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's a testament to how awesome the show was, man, and the intrigue that's behind it. Let me just say, when you got somebody like that wants to have it all about them when there would be no show without you guys, you can create. I could sit here and come up with the greatest ideas ever, but if I don't have the team to do it, I'm not giving them the credit. I mean, I guess, I would never, ever in my wildest dreams think about doing that, but you don't even want to associate with people like that, especially if they took advantage of you.
That's you can't change the stripes of a tiger, right? I mean, once you are who you are. I like Johnny, right? I mean, but Johnny he's very arrogant. He's narcissist. I mean, I'm not speaking out of turn here. I mean, everyone that knows him says the same thing. And it comes to time where Johnny, you made a shit ton of money off of us, and sharing the wealth, buddy, sharing it. Like it's a win-win for everybody if we all win, right? Don't have it all for yourself. That mentality that's gone, right? I mean,
the whole thing is like everybody should win. And if they don't, that's how people turn their back on you. That's how things fall apart and why things don't become successful, or why empires fall, or it's power struggle. It's I want all the glory, and it's so unnecessary. You can't win that way. Nobody wins that way.
And that goes with life. That's business. And in business, family, it's not about one individual, right? It's about a collaboration of team members. And the stronger you are as a team, you put the individuals out of business, right? And it's funny how some people operate that way, though. It's.
Well, here's a question then that maybe could kind of tie into that. And I was going to ask you that. So when you guys were on Gladiators and one of you guys got injured, I know more often it happened to a contestant that got injured and they'd have to get a sub. I remember that. But sometimes you guys would get injured, I'm sure. What happened? Did you guys have coverage for that? Did they take care of you? Like, what actually occurred? Did you have to sub in a Gladiator, or what was the procedure on that?
That's a great question. So they did take care of, the injuries, in the 7 years I was on that show, I had, I think, 9 surgeries, and most of them were all shoulder operations. I had full thickness tears, or, supraspinatus, subscapular, whatever. The way we were paid, you had a contract, and usually there was 26 episodes in one season. So we did 2 seasons back to back, 13 episodes each. So 26 total. And where you made your money was the residual. So if you missed one show, right? So I think there were 7 events in one show. If you weren't on any of the events for that one show, you missed out on a shit ton of residual money, right? So, and you fed your family on that. So it was a difficult situation that each one of us were in when we were injured, because the Gladiators, we would do 2 shows all day. It was a very long day of filming. The Contender would, compete. And if they advanced on, they wouldn't compete again for 4 or 5 days later. Well, we were doing 2 shows a day. And if you were injured, I got to tell you, man, it was, and the shitty thing is every year on that show, I got injured almost the first or second episode. And, I don't know if you've ever had a complete torn on your rotator cuff, whether, there's 5 different rotator cuffs, but it doesn't matter. You don't have anything left. You don't have any strength. No. You're nothing. It's like blowing out your knee. And I got to tell you, we did more Vicodin and Stadol and stuff just to get through the games. It was a mess, man. It was tough.
Well, and then that messes up your training too, which you obviously want to be doing, because you can't there's so many things you can't do. I've worked with so many rotator problems with people that I've had to help and coach. I've seen that's one of the more common injuries, especially amongst weightlifters who are trying to bench too much and, shit like that, and heavy shoulder presses. But guys, when you have that kind of injury, like Jim's saying, especially that early on, I don't know how you functioned to the level that you did.
Dylan. I'm being completely honest with you. Never had any shoulder injuries all the years of playing football until that first year on the Gladiators. And it was devastating.
Well, you're hitting without pads. Think about like the different, and you're coming at different angles, and you're swinging jowl. I mean, those things over time, that accumulates. And plus you had prior football that you didn't get injured, but you were still, early stage damage.
For sure.
So you were far more susceptible, but it's just, you got to think when you're getting pounded on over and over, and with no pads. I mean, if anybody goes back and watches, there's some collision. I remember me and my dad used to sit in the living room, and he'd be like, "Whoa, shit!"
Let me tell you, Dylan, there was collisions that, this was a family. They wanted it to be a family-oriented show, right? So they didn't want to display and portray the injuries that occurred. I mean, I got to tell you, there was one year this guy was running up the conveyor belt on the Eliminator, the Contender, and he caught his 3 fingers in the rotating escalator bit.
Yeah,
he chopped those damn 3 fingers off. Let me tell you something. Shit. So the escalator conveyor belt thing or whatever, they ran up the deal, right? And they go over the thing, and then they up the
road. A lot of people couldn't make it up that thing.
Nobody knew it, right? His adrenaline, he cut the 2 fingers right off. The other one was severed almost completely. I'm at the end, waiting for the contenders to come through their chute or whatever to finish. And all of a sudden, he finishes, and we look down, and oh my God, he was bleeding everywhere. And we're like, oh my God, oh my God. So fortunately, they recovered the 2 fingers and they sewed them back on. I don't know what happened to him. He left. I mean, there was major top surgery for that guy, but that's just one injury that of the 7 years. There was an injury that Turbo, had on his knee, it was like a Joe Theismann injury. It was so grotesque, and you couldn't even watch it. It was like,
no.
And he came back the next year. That he's a tough son of a gun. That Galen is. Turbo is.
He looks like it.
I got to tell you, and I'm going to say, he was, to me, of all the gladiators, including myself, I think he was probably the toughest, probably the most true athlete that we had. He was so intense, but so good at every game. He was probably the best athlete that we had as a gladiator. I mean, he
was a little scary, man, when I was a kid.
He was a big dude, man. He was about 245, big, broad shoulders. And that guy never played football. He was a pretty good athlete in high school, but I got to tell you, he was a skill set, that guy. I mean, he was really good.
Like,
but yeah, his injury was one that you can't even watch on film. That's how bad it was.
No. If you guys want to understand, if you have the stomach for it, which you probably don't, type in Joe Theismann. And if you don't know who that is, that was a tremendous quarterback for the Redskins. And you watch him, Lawrence Taylor, break his leg, and you probably have
can't
nightmares.
Watch it. I just got the chills when you said I cannot watch it. I do too, because you know it's bad. It's like grotesque. It's
dude, the first time I saw it, I wanted to fucking vomit. Seriously.
And I watched it because, we're all watching the game that night, and they replayed it. And oh my God, I could never, ever again watch it again, ever. It just, no way.
I think that was 1980. I want to say 87. I was only 5, but it was like 87, I believe. But anybody can YouTube it. Just be prepared if you YouTube it to have some nightmares.
It's a bad one. Trust me.
It's one of the worst, probably the worst.
One of the worst injuries ever. So,
that's horrible. So, with that, I guess would pose the question that probably everybody wonders. And listen, guys, just so you know, because people operate their channels differently. I'm not Mr. Assume what people use, say somebody uses this or that. That's not my style. You guys know that to follow me. I don't do all of that shit. We're not going to talk about specific people. I'm not going to ask Jim on the spot who may have used this or that. But I think it's fair to say that guys that size, people are going to assume there's some kind of use going on back there. So we're not going to talk about others. If they ever talk about it, it's probably out there. And, that's not for us to discuss. But for you, if you're comfortable with it, did you ever use anything? Because I'm sure there was pressure to be big and strong and look good on TV and everything. I mean, do you have any experience there, or do you not want to even get into that?
I'll be transparent as much as you want. I think we all have to realize that, I'm 61 years old. When the first time I ever heard of performance enhancing drugs, anabolic steroids, I was a sophomore in college.
Okay.
I was, remember I graduated at 200 pounds. I got to by my sophomore year, I was about 206, 207, right in there, right? We had a guy.
How tall are you? I forgot to ask you. How tall are you?
5'11" and a half. I got to put that half inch in there,
Hell yeah.
So my sophomore year, we had a guy come in that was a JC transfer. We've never seen a guy so built and so massive. I was like, I'm not going to say the guy's name. His first name's John. I can tell you that. Anyhow, he came into the team. He was 280 pounds, ripped. He was I think he played defensive tackle or nose guard. Our entire team was like, oh my God, look at this guy. Well, he introduced anabolic steroids to the entire team, basically. And a few, because everyone was curious, like, how do you look like that? Right. I mean, I was training my ass off. And so he introduced it to the team, and there was a few guys that started it. And my first time I did a cycle, and the one thing that I can at least state truthfully and for the record, I did 2 cycles every year for 6 weeks, no longer, for quite a few years, but I never abused in terms of abuse, taking more than 2 PEDs at a time, ever. I just didn't do it. I get too big. I wanted to look like an athlete. I didn't want to look like a bodybuilder. But I can tell you that the first time I used it, I went from 208 and I got to 228 in a matter of 4 weeks. And that's the God's honest truth. And it was not fat. I mean, I trained my ass off. And I think me being 19, almost 20 then, just, there was 6 years of hard training that I did back then even. I think the muscle maturity and things like that helped. And I kept my weight right at 228 to 234 for the next 20 years. I never fluctuated more than that, right? And because I didn't want to look massive. I didn't want to look like a bodybuilder. I still wanted to be an athlete first and foremost.
Sure.
But we all have to remember when I did it, this was in the early 80s, early 90s, right? The Gladiators came around in 1989 and ended in 97. Nobody knew much about anabolic steroids. That it was just something you just did. It wasn't looked upon as something bad, right? Even though they tested in the NFL, they tested me in the NFL when I was at Kansas City. I wasn't using it then, So yes, during the Gladiators, did I use them? Yes, I did. It wasn't for me to put on a bunch of muscle mass. It was more about recovery, basically. And it did help with the recovery because, I could still train, still do the Gladiators twice a day. And I still felt like I had some gas in the tank, even at the end of the night, I still felt like I was ready to go. But again, they started testing us on the Gladiators, for steroids.
Oh yeah. Shit.
So, and I got to tell you an interesting story. I was not doing anything that entire year. We filmed our show June and July, 3 weeks out of the year. They tested me because they picked us off during the show. Hey, you need to go get tested. I had to go down to the doctor's office. They did a urine sample. And the next day they said I was positive. No, I wasn't. I can guarantee you I wasn't doing anything for an entire year unless some metabolites stayed in my system for a year, which I highly doubt. And I went to the producers, the directors, and because they said, Jim, that's the policy. You're off the show. And I did everything I could to convince them to retest me that it was a false positive. It had to have been. I'm telling. And so I went in the next day, they tested me and I was negative. So, those things do happen, It could have been something, back then they had the pro hormones, I could have been doing a pro hormone that showed higher levels of testosterone or whatever. And they assumed because of that, maybe I was taking anabolic steroids. I don't know.
Certain things can trigger false positive. I can't list them all here, but there's a variety of things that could do that. And one thing I was going to say is a lot of times when people run their first cycles, that's where you make the most gain.
Right? That's the most gain I made right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And it tends to be that way for like 98% of the people that use them, depending upon whatever cycles they run down the road, it's possible. But your best, most rapid gains are generally going to be your first cycle. So that's why and some people hypo respond more than others. I know some people are like, oh, that doesn't exist. Well, the fuck it doesn't, because I've been around this for over a decade. It most certainly does exist. Yeah. And you saw that firsthand. What do you remember what it was that you ran your first cycle? I always
did the same too every year. I did tasipinate and I did, there's two other, I either did Cipinate or D-ball together or the Cipinate and Anavar. And that was it. I mean, I did years later. I was probably 30, right after the Gladiators, I was 35 when it ended. So I was probably 39. I tried Tren. Oh my gosh, I got so angry off that stuff. I felt like I was going to beat myself up.
I have a video that I recently did, and it's titled "The Best Way to do trenbolone is to not do it at all. That's the time.
And I became an animal. I mean, I got so angry.
Oh.
I mean, I was just pissed off. And I was like, I even said to myself, I mean, I kind of like that feeling, but I said to myself, hey, man, oh man, I'm a frightening dude. I was getting mad at everything. I said, I'm never touching that shit ever again. And
no, I've talked about the problems I had, and I did it 4 times, and it every time it got worse, and the results got better, but the problem was the problems got worse and worse, worse. And it's just completely unnecessary for anybody to use. And I know that's going to anger some people, and I really don't give a fuck because it's a fact. And, if your feelings get hurt over that, I'm sorry. I'm trying to teach people how to protect themselves and actually have longevity if they're going to use steroids. I teach people how to use them, but still have long-term health. These guys don't think about tomorrow when they're doing things like this. They have no concept whatsoever. No. And that's, I do quite well on my teaching because a lot of people respect that. But then I've got the bros that hate my guts because I don't tell them what they want to hear. But I'm sorry, telling you what you want to hear is kind of that new age bitch mentality that does nobody any good. And it all it does is hurt you.
And we both know that, TRT is something complete, now. Shit, if you're not on testosterone replacement therapy, especially if you're 50 and older, I mean, they've done there are so many health benefits. If you're doing it correctly, you're getting blood work, you're under the doctor's care, under someone that knows what they're doing like yourself, right? So, I got off PEDs, when last time I was probably, I'm trying to think, probably 47, 48. And then completely done. Didn't do anything until last year. Finally, just, I was feeling depressed, didn't feel good, couldn't get my rhythm. Just, what makes a guy is testosterone, right? And so I talked to my wife and me being a nut on that stuff, she just said, if you do it under a doctor's care and you do the right amount, I'll go for it, right? Because libido was down. I didn't feel good. I just didn't have it. I just didn't want to go to the gym any longer. And so I went to a doctor in Bend, Oregon, and my total testosterone was like 280. And he said, gee whiz, no wonder you don't feel good. And so got under that care, and right around at 180 milligrams, but I think I was at, instead of 200 milligrams per cc, I was at 180. And that was just perfect for me. If I go over that, I feel a little crazy, like I'm going to kick your ass. Yeah. That's just me, right? I mean, I get angry. I don't know what it is. Like some guys they can do a ton of stuff. And I got a buddy and he can do all this stuff and he's nice and easy and calm. Not me.
But it's just like some people are super estrogen prone and some people just don't respond to certain compounds, and some people respond great. And a lot of the thing too with the TRT is not running 250 and 300 milligrams a week. That is being on, and people don't understand that. Even 200, unless you are severely hypogonadal, 200, because you have to understand that your testosterone total number is going to be 5 to 7 times your dose, generally 7. You do not want to be walking around over 1,000 on your total test daily. It's long-term. It'll kill you shorter. Your lifespan's going to shorten. That fine line, when you're in that 600 to like 750 range, maybe 625, that's perfect. I mean,
and that's right. So I was right around 160 milligrams. I was almost dead on. I was right 620, and then I get to 180, and I'm right around 780, 790. But I like the doctor said, I like you on the 160. I like 180 because I do feel a little, I'm still not a nut, but I do like, it gives me that extra, like I just feel better, right? It's being optimal. And I like between 160 and 180, but everybody's different, right? So.
Absolutely. And, some people have more severe conditions than others, and some people just respond differently. And there's a lot. Some people get their testosterone from like an underground lab, and sometimes it's dosed higher than it says. And that's why blood work, I stress this, blood work is the end all be all when you're using a PED, meaning there's nothing more important than blood work and then your post cycle, because without your recovery and without your health, there are no gains, there are no cycles, there's nothing. There's no such thing as a shortcut and a quick, there's just not. And everybody wants that. And it's not.
Dylan, we both know, being around nutrition, training, let me tell you, there is no doubt that PEDs do work if you do everything else in conjunction. Sound diet, sleep, you're not out drinking and partying and doing all. Because I've been around the block enough and I've seen individuals take these anabolic steroids, PEDs, and they thought, oh, I got the wonder drug. I'm good to go. I don't need to train. Bullshit. They didn't look any differently 6 weeks, 8 weeks down the road than they did previously. They thought it was a miracle drug. And that's not it. You got to train your ass off. You better be sound on your diet. You better know what you're doing. You better get to sleep. You better take your dietary supplements. You better know what you're doing, because it's a wheel. And if you want that 360 to come around to make yourself look fairly decent, you got to do it all, and not just once a week, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, period.
Yes. And that's, if you had any concept of how many people I get that think that this is like, I quote Joe Pesci for my cousin Vinny, the same guy that sold Jack as beanstalk beans. The shit, like, listen, they do work, like you said, and they can do some miraculous things. But if you think for 1 second, that these are like, I get this all the time, because using steroids out of shape is terrible, and it can harm you. It like enhances your side effects by 10 times. And beyond that, they think that it's automatically going to put them into Mr. Olympia shape. They're going to lose all this weight. Steroids are not fat burners. They're not weight loss drugs. And secondly, they're not going to make you gain 30 and 40 pounds and look like the IFBB pro bodybuilder. That's not how this shit works. The diet has to be strict. It has to be disciplined. You have to be in the gym. You have to do the right kind of lifts to coincide with the right kind of. I mean, there's
sorry.
Somebody's agreeing with me in the background. But yes, I totally agree with you. So that kind of brings me to the next thing. And this is where we really got into conversation, was when we started talking about peptides and SARMs. Mainly peptides, but both, because that was kind of where your intrigue was. And obviously I might be versed on all of this, but I'm most well versed with SARMs and peptides especially. So we really got into that. So, and being that those are, far different than steroids, and people can have the SARMs, steroids, peptides argument. The fact is that steroids are stronger, but SARMs and peptides may be more effective because A, side effects are less. So B, that means your recovery is easier and the keepability is a lot easier. So on the surface, what I tell people is no shit, steroids are stronger, and no shit, you're going to have results quicker. But long term, what's your risk versus reward? You're going to have more side effects, more problems. You're probably going to keep far less. And and then the argument is, well, there's not enough studies on SARMs. Mm-hmm. True. But some of them go back to the 90s. And you're risking with anything that you take, regardless of what it is.
And even dietary supplements. Come on, don't think that you're taking a vitamin D and you're at, let's say, I don't know. I don't even want to go down that road, because some people think that the more is better. And let me tell you, you can do extreme damage to your body, even with a dietary supplement, vitamin C or D or E or anything else, if you get it in excess. It's wow.
I always tell people a couple things. Less is more. A lot of times with steroids, PEDs, and this is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yeah.
And people look at that and they're like, well, I want it right now. And hey, it's human nature. When I want something, I fucking want it right now too. But as we get older, we start to realize that's not really how life works.
Very true, Dylan. Very true.
And so when we were talking, you kind of started telling me about your shoulder, your subscapularis. Guys, there's different parts of the rotator. Subscapularis is a big part of the rotator that Jim's injured. And so he was kind of telling me asked me if I'd ever, because Jim didn't know my background at all when I contacted him. So he brought up peptides to me, and I kind of chuckled, remember, in the phone, and I said, well, that's kind of what I do. So tell me about your experience with peptides and why you find them so intriguing and why the conversation got really good between us, kind of get into that a little bit.
And that, I got to tell you, when I didn't know your background and I brought up the peptides thinking I was going to teach you something or two. And man, that connection, I just thought, wow, this guy's prolific. He knows his shit. So and it was really intriguing for me. But I got to tell you, I used a couple. I'll mention two of the peptides. I tore I've had bad shoulders. I've had 19 surgeries. I've had 12 to 13 total now surgeries on both shoulders. Mostly I've had 3 arthroscopic. All of the other ones are open rotator cuff repairs. Pretty bad. So it was last year around December, my wife and I were traveling, and I picked up a piece of luggage and I threw it up on the overhead, right? And I just did it wrong. And my shoulder, I was like, oh my God. And my shoulder, I was just shaking. My hand was just, I said, shit, I tore my freaking rotator cuff again. And we were going on vacation, and I was in so much pain, and I just knew it. I'm like, really? I am not getting another shoulder surgery. So I go back, we get back to Denver a week later, schedule see the doctor in Denver, who's the Denver Broncos head guy. And so they obviously do the x-ray, right? And he says, you probably don't need an MRI. I can already tell you, you got one of the 2 main rotator cuffs blown. He said, have you ever tried PRP? And I said, no, but I'd like to. He said, well, why don't we give you a cortisone injection? And they usually work or they don't, right? And in this case, it didn't work at all. Usually it does give a little bit of relief. So
I've been there.
So 3 weeks later, I did the PRP, and that was $1,000 out of pocket, right? So that didn't do anything. And I was expecting, some big things out of the PRP, the plasma. And now I'm down on my luck. And now I'm like, I am not getting surgery. I'm just not doing that. And so my background is in sports nutrition. I was the VP of product development for 24 Hour Fitness. I was the director of product development for Lifetime, $2 billion companies, did all their supplements and nutrition products. So background, I know a little bit about that arena. I always knew a little bit about peptides. To be honest, Dylan, I never looked into them. And nor did I even have a buddy that ever did them where it intrigued me to look into them. So here I am at home, and I'm like, what am I going to do now? So I started researching stuff on the internet like we all do. And who pops up is Jay Campbell. Well, Jay Campbell, I think, and this is my own opinion, I think he's one of the most well-rehearsed gurus when it comes to peptides. This guy knows his shit almost as much as you do. Anyhow, so I started watching all his YouTube videos, and I was taken back. I thought, you got to be kidding. Come on. Some things are too good to be true. This has got to be too good to be true. So kept reading. And so I decided to order 2 of the peptides, the BBC 157 and the TB 500, the thymosin beta 4, which those 2 together, they call them the Wolverine stack. Yeah. So I could not, and I'm telling you the honest truth, I couldn't even lift my arm up. I couldn't I couldn't do anything. This was now 5 weeks post when I injured my shoulder. And remember, I had cortisone injection, PRP, the plasma-rich injection. None of that worked. And so I ordered the peptides, and it was about the second going on to the 3rd week. And I went into the gym because I still went to the gym no matter what, but I couldn't train my upper body, right? I went in and it was right around that 3rd week. I called my wife and I said, oh my God, what? I'm going to cuss her. My fucking shoulder. I was doing overheads like this. I was like, oh my God. And I swear to God, then I was a believer. I said, you got to be kidding me. So I stayed on right around, the shoulder still hurt, but I could at least go to the gym, do all my press movements. It wasn't hurting me at all. I had no pain whatsoever. So I stayed on for the 12 weeks, got off, and right around the 14th week, guess what? I took another trip, and I flung the suitcase on the conveyor belt, to go through security. And God dang it, if I didn't hurt it again. And this time it was worse than the first time. And so I immediately did my trip, came back, and I was at now, because you remember I was on 12 weeks. I was only off for 2 weeks, and I wanted to stay off longer, and I did. I stayed off for another 3 weeks and got back on. But within 3 days, and I only did the BBC 157, my shoulder got to the point where at least I could train. I didn't do the TB 500, and I was a believer. And I got to tell you, from that point on, now I'm starting to tell everybody about them, everybody I knew. Lo and behold, all my buddies, they were doing shit. They're doing peptides and doing the ipamorelin and the CJC 1295. So now I'm intrigued. Now I'm doing the other two. And the wonders that those two did, let me tell you, they're branched chain amino acids. I am such a believer in peptides. I would use them over anabolic steroids any day. I did those two, the CJC 1295 and the ipamorelin together. I got so freaking shredded. Dylan, I'd never had my upper body fairly vascular. My lower body, I've never really had any vascularity in the lower extremities. I got so shredded, and I didn't change one thing in my diet, my training. I didn't do any cardio. I was getting so vascular in my lower extremities. I went back to Montana to see my family, and my brother said, "Holy shit, what are you doing? I've never seen you look so good in my life. And you're only 195 pounds, not 230. And that right there, I was like, and deep sleep. I was sleeping so hard, I'd wake up in the morning going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Incredible.
Ipamorelin. I was just going to say, and I was going to make mention of that after you were talking about TB and BPC, that some of the two most widely used and popular are ipamorelin and CJC 1295. And they really do wonders. Semorelin's another one that's not as popular that I've done a video on. I'll share it with you, that you'll probably have some intrigue on that one too. There's so many to choose from that do so many different things. You've got peptides for everything now. When I started getting into it, there was, you'd go to a peptide store shop and there'd be like maybe 10. Now you can go pages and pages and pages of them. I mean, there's stuff for everything. Like I was telling you about for tanning, there's sexual enhancements, there's stuff for hair, there's stuff for sleep, there's stuff for anti-aging. I mean, the list goes on. And then one of the things that I have done a video on, because the stack that you ran for healing is absolutely tremendous, but you can take it a step further, and that's when you add SARM's healing in there too. And then so especially if and listen, I'm not saying that these are going to miraculously heal drastic injuries, but I've seen people with torn ACLs and significant injuries that take, 9 to 12 months to heal, cut that time down, significantly. And, yes. And, like a guy like Adrian Peterson that recovered from an ACL, something you've never seen. I don't know if he did anything or not, but these were the things that would make that capable.
Well, let me tell you something interesting, Dylan. Sorry to interrupt you. And I'm sure Steve won't mind me telling this story. Steve Henneberry Tower. He called me 3 weeks ago. He had fairly large bone spur on his elbow, and he couldn't train. He couldn't, extend his arm out.
Oh, that's terrible.
Scheduled to get an MRI. He knew about peptides. He did some of the other ones, not the acute injury type ones, but so I told him about the Wolverine stack. He ended up ordering the BBC 157. He did 2 injections. Remember, he couldn't even straighten his arm out because he called me and said, Jim, you're not going to believe this. All the pain that, obviously the bone spur is still there. He said, all the pain's gone. I'm actually back in the gym doing everything I was doing previously. He canceled his doctor's appointment, canceled his MRI. What does that tell you? Like, these are real hand life experiences that people are going through that is freaking no joke, man. I got to tell you, it's pretty phenomenal.
There's always going to be skeptics. And look, a lot of these websites with SARMs and peptides, people that say that they got a bad product or bad experience, some people just don't respond. But a lot of these places don't test their products. And so some of them have bad intentions, and some of them don't know who they're buying raw materials from. They don't test the things before they sell them. So it's still just as bad because they're not doing due diligence. But regardless, my point here is that if you have real pure peptides, SARMs, not only do they work, but they work drastically. And just because I say something works drastic doesn't mean that you have to gain 20 pounds, and that's like people that make comments, like there's steroids like Winstrol, Anavar, Primobolan. Those don't make you gain 10, 15, 20 pounds. Just because you're using steroids doesn't mean you have to gain and be 300 pounds. That's not how this works. There's different things for different, things that you want, different goals. They're all different. Just like with peptides, they when I say something's extremely strong, strength doesn't mean just size. Okay. Like GW 501, 516, it's extremely strong for endurance and fixing your metabolism, but that's here misconception and media portrayal and portrayal, which we want to avoid all of those.
Here's an interesting scenario or story for you. So I ordered, I did some SARMs years ago, didn't really get much out of them. Right. So, and I ordered some SARMs from a company, I can't even pronounce it. Cameo, something, I don't know.
It's Cameo, and I did a video on them. They're the biggest piece
so I
of
ordered
shit
a
on the
SARM
planet.
out there, and I don't know if it's right. I don't know if they're testing with the certificate of analysis, but definitely didn't work. I didn't see a bump in anything that it was supposed to be doing. So I won't tell the end users what one it is, but the company, I can't even pronounce it, Cameo or whatever you just said. But that to me, it's like, well, they state that they test every product, but is that so true, especially if it's unregulated? I mean, come on, they don't have to. So
no, and they don't include it with every order, and their bottles look like spray paint bottles, and they spend exorbitant amounts of money on fake review sites that's so blatant, and people don't realize so they put these on like Outlook India and Tribune India, these major publications, and then you scroll down and it tells you that this is the opinion of a writer that put it there, and they pay, it's $750 to $1,500 to put these articles out, and they do it over and over and over and over and over, and they have all these fake review sites, and then what they do is they dominate the rankings so people go buy from them, and they fuck.
What a shitty way to do. What a shitty way to do business, right? It's like,
Jim, I spent a year just researching all the ways that these companies that got so big on Google, what they did, because I know all the people telling me the shit sucks, but if you go on Google, it looks like they're great because they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on this because they're selling millions of dollars. So the hundreds of thousands is potato chips because you got to spend money to make money.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to talk about that too much, but I want to point that out to people watching, that the people that get the wrong ideas or think that these things are bad or bunk or whatever, there's a reason why, because you're buying dog shit.
Well, that, that happens, obviously, even the dietary supplement world, people, they don't do it as much nowadays because they have more of the current GMPs in place. But a lot of people were cutting corners and doing stuff that made some prolific gains for people when they were supposed to be having one compound or ingredient, and they'd add some other stuff that was a little bit higher than the testing came out for, which, you don't find it too often nowadays, but it still occurs,
No, and I'll tell you, I have so many years in the supplement industry, and it goes back. I remember it was the year 2000, and it was when Zenadrin was a big one, and that was ephedrine. And I remember taking it not FDA regulated. You don't know how much is in each pill. I had a fucking like the worst panic attack ever because I smoked some weed on top of taking too much of this because you don't know what you're getting. In my heart, I could see it pounding out of my chest. I was holding my mom and dad like, I'm going to fucking die. Like, you got to do something. And my heart's just going, a lot of things aren't like protein powders. They're not made in FDA regulated facilities, a lot of them. And I point that out to people. And you're getting a really, cut up, grainy protein powder. And that's why the expensive proteins, they're made in FDA regulated facilities, and the expensive supplements. There's a reason for you're getting what you pay for. Is my point.
Very true.
And that's just life in general. So that's why I recommended to Jim to try Umbrella Labs. Like I put the video out because they do COAs. Even they send it with your product. So I'm going to, attempt to help you look at some things. And let me touch on this real quick before we kind of sign off here. So you ran the TB500 and MK67 or TB500 and BPC 157 stack, that's the ticket. But when we take it a step further, we add MK677 and MK2866, and oftentimes we'll have LGD 4033 in there. Now, when you do that, you got the short-term healing with the 2866, the long-term healing like the 677, because 677 is the next closest thing to HGH you can get at a fraction of the cost and no injections. And then the LGD is kind of, it doesn't heal near the effects of 2866 and MK67, but it has the healing abilities, but it also has the strength and size. So then when you run, because with the peptides, you're not gaining, the two you're talking about, you're not gaining any size or strength with them, you're getting the healing. Now you're getting the healing and the multitude of other benefits.
Incredible.
So, and we're still keeping the side effects minimal, especially 677 is not hormonal, so there's no suppression or anything. But that's one we'll talk about later. And maybe, maybe you'll do it, or we'll talk about it, and then we can talk about it on another video or something like that.
For sure. So, I had a question for you, and even for the audience, WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Association, in 2022, peptides were they were not permitted, prohibited.
Right.
And now in 2002, they decided to have them on their list, right, as prohibited substances or compounds. I find that interesting. It's like, because they're branch chains, right? So how do these organizations, especially the WADA, how do they test for that? I mean, if an athlete's taken a peptide, how would they know that what test is that? Is that just
So the tests that they do with SARMs and peptides especially are very, you don't see SARMs and peptides on too many lists because the tests are very intrinsic and they're very expensive. They're not common. And the thing though now is these tests are getting trickier. So the tests are being able to detect more for longer. I've seen people even show Primobolan for like 16, 18 months getting popped now. I'm not saying everybody, but I've seen it. And the problem with SARMs, especially and peptides, is a lot of times the detection times are not known. Like when people always ask me, what's the detection time? If I'm being honest, which I do, and transparent, I can't answer that because there's no set detection time. I've seen people get popped for GW and on 4 weeks. And I've seen people get popped for GW on 20 weeks. And there'll be people that argue that say, you base it on the half-life of this. Well, that doesn't always hold true. Sometimes people metabolize differently. Sometimes there's other shit in there. And sometimes the tests are getting more and more and more stringent, and they're smart. Listen, we might get smart and figure things out. But while we're doing that, they're also getting smarter. And they're always gonna be one up on all of us. I don't give a shit what anybody says. They are. And so you're always, listen, anytime that you take a drug test and you're using something, whether it's illicit street drugs or, PEDs, you're taking a risk. You're just taking a risk. And you can drink everything under the sun to get them out. You can sit in saunas, you can sweat, you can do this, you can do that. Unless you got somebody in there that's switching urine for you that is pure, you're never 100%
true. Yeah.
And I hate answering those questions because then people come back at me and go, hey, fucking Gemelli, you said this. And I always tell them, look, I don't really have a good answer for you, because everybody's different. Everybody's different. Sure. It's like me laying out a protocol for you, giving it to somebody else, and you having two completely different results.
Very true.
And it's everything when it comes to this, and really in life is trial and error.
Very true.
You know what I mean?
Very true. I mean, you can do the same thing with creatine. Body. I mean, there's responders and non-responders, and some people make great gains off creatine, in a 12-week cycle, and some guys are just non-responders. They could be getting too much creatine in their diet as it is, so they don't really see a influx in water, I'm not going to go through all that stuff, but same thing with supplements, same thing. I mean, it's very true.
And then people will get a little angry and it's like, well, you don't know what you're talking. No, I actually do know what I'm talking about. And I'm being honest with you and not misleading you. That's the difference. The best teachers have often made the most mistakes, and the best teachers are the ones that take accountability and the ones that will admit when there's not a good answer, or that they may not know the answer because there's not a good one to give.
Yeah, I agree.
And when I started, Jim, I used to be one of those guys that's like, I got to be perfect. I got to know everything. I've got to know all the answers. And if I don't know, I got to make it look like I know. And that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah,
it doesn't. I got a lot more respect for somebody that will give me the honest truth, that will tell me how it is and not tell me what I want to hear. So,
I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to tell you how appreciative I am of your time and how fun this was. I can't believe how fast an hour, 20 some minutes goes by.
It's kind
insane.
of fun too.
I feel like
I appreciate you too. And it's been a good beginning of a great friendship, and hope to have you have me back on again sometime soon. I'd love to pick your brain on some of the SARM stuff doing with the regenerative property type peptides I've been doing. So I see myself as I definitely a believer. I can tell you that, and firsthand experience. That pretty remarkable in my mind. No matter how you spend it,
I can tell you that.
Pretty cool stuff. So
I'm sure people are going to want to hear you again. I definitely want to talk to you again. So we'll definitely set something up, and it's been an absolute pleasure and just like kind of a dream come true for me, because I watch so much on TV, and man, it's just so cool.
Thanks,
so guys, I want you to go to like Instagram and check out Jim there. Just type in Jim LASER Starr. You'll find him. Look him up. Watch the Netflix stuff. And if you really want to get into it, go back and check out some of the old episodes and watch Jim kick some ass on the original American Gladiators too. But support him and follow him, guys, because he's got some cool
appreciate
stuff.
It. Yeah, just go to Instagram, and I've never been a social media type bug guy. Kind of got more into it after the Netflix documentary. So if you follow me on Instagram, it'd be great to have you hit me up and follow me. I'd be really appreciative. So thank you, Dylan. And I appreciate you as a friend, and hopefully you'll have me on again sometime soon.
Absolutely. All right. Guys, I want to thank everybody that's been watching. Dylan Gemelli, signing
Thanks,
off.
buddy.